We're speaking with Helene Dunbar, who is the author of These Gentle Wounds, a young adult contemporary that releases from Flux on May 8th. So, Helene, the title of this book, and certainly together with this beautiful cover, gave us the sense that this will be on the poignant side, possibly the rip our hearts from our chests and leave them beating on the floor side. Tell us a bit about the premise of These Gentle Wounds and what inspired you to tackle this subject matter.
Well, I used to work for an educational publisher as a freelancer, and I would write in part about major cultural court cases. So two of the assignments I was given were the Susan Smith trial in 1994 and Andrea Yates in 2001. And in both of those cases, they were mothers who murdered their children, unfortunately. And then in 2011, there was a case in upstate New York where a mother drove her four children into the river and killed three of them. But one of them, a 10-year-old boy, was able to escape. And I was trying to think about what my next project was going to be, and I started wondering, what kind of life is this boy going to have? And this book basically is an answer to that question. Now, I have to say that I have followed what has happened to that particular child, and this is not what happens in my book, but
Right.
it was basically one of those I wonder what books.
Mm.
And I wrote it for myself, and I never really even thought I was going to show it to my agent at the time.
Wow.
And then it started winning a couple of awards, and I thought, okay, maybe I should.
Wow.
So the title actually came from my editor. The original working title was In Case of Emergency, which I never really liked. I'm pretty uncomfortable with writing titles or headlines. And Brian Berry, my editor, suggested this on a list of other titles, and I instantly gravitated towards it. We talked a lot about the word gentle, which I was a bit on the fence about because my main character, has pretty substantial post-traumatic stress disorder from this event, and there's nothing gentle about it at all. But we started talking about the concept of people not really understanding mental wounds as opposed to physical wounds, and that's something that my character wrestles with. At one point he says, I almost wish I'd lost a leg, because people see that and they understand the pain.
Right. So when we're dealing with sensitive subject matter as writers that we may not have lived ourselves, what do you think it's important to keep in mind in our portrayals? I mean, what do you keep in mind when you're handling something that's quite sensitive?
I think in this case, I did a lot of research by hanging out in chat rooms and following threads of people with PTSD, and it's very much a diagnosis that is different in every person. So I heard my main character, Gordy, his voice was always extremely clear in my head, sometimes uncomfortably so, and I made sure that his symptoms were true to life. I actually have a blog piece where I reference Sarah Fine, who's another young adult writer, but she's also a child psychologist, and she did a 10-part series on childhood PTSD and what childhood trauma actually does to change the brain. So actually read her series just as I was going into final edits, and I was very glad to see that I had pretty much gotten it right. But again, it's one character. He's not trying to represent every child who's been through trauma. I did want to focus on somebody who had been through, who was dealing with PTSD in a non-military way.
Right.
I have had readers say, oh, I expected him to be in the military. I didn't know that other people had PTSD. So I think the military's done a great job of educating people about PTSD, but I think we need to do more as just training people or educating them about what children go through and the ways they can be damaged or hurt. You know, a growing brain is affected in many ways. So.
How long did it take you to write this book, and was it a typical process for you?
It was a very typical process for me, but my process, I think, is somewhat atypical. I really haven't come across anybody who writes with the same chaos that I do.
Oh.
I was writing this. I was probably working on 2 other manuscripts at the same time. I don't write in order.
Mm-hmm.
I very rarely know what's going to happen. I don't plot. I don't outline. I don't do character studies. Sometimes 3/4 of the way through a book, I'll learn something new about a character and have to go through the first 3/4 and add that back in. It's really an organic work in process. I can say that I started it probably in the case, the most recent case, well, not the most recent case, but the case in upstate New York was January of 2011, so I probably started it shortly after that, and I just signed off on final edits.
A typical writing day for you, what does that look like?
At the moment, I can't say I have a typical writing day or that I even have a writing day. I recently adopted a little girl, so I have no time to do anything, and I have 2 part-time jobs.
Right.
So I've basically been dealing with my writing on a crisis basis. Whoever's yelling the loudest, whatever deadline needs to be met, is what I try to do. It's really snippets of time, and by snippets I really do mean 5 and 10-minute periods where I'm walking the dog and I have a brainstorm and I come home and, I've got to write these 3 sentences down. I definitely was hampered by the internet and everybody saying you have to outline, you have to interview your characters, you have to know, the end of your book. Once I allowed myself not to have to know that, my writing really took off. When I thought I had to do it the way everybody else did it, I was really hampered.
What books are you reading right now?
I'm grateful to be part of One for Kidlit, so we're doing a lot to support each other's readers. That's readers' copies, so really the reading time I've got has been devoted to that.
Right. What part of These Gentle Wounds are you going to read for us?
I'm going to read the first chapter, which sets up both the relationship between my main character, Gordy, and his older brother, which is a very close relationship, and sets up the premise of the book.
The last thing I saw before the car hit the water was an eagle pasted against the sky, and what I remember is this. His tapered wings filled the width of the dirty window. The air held him up with the promise of magic. He looked free. I used to dream about that bird, but I don't have dreams anymore. All I have are memories. My arms are pinned, water rushes past my ears, and the kids cry in the back seat as they start to wake up. My mom's hands are wrapped around the steering wheel as she prays, saying words that make no sense but that sound something like poetry. I've left the car window cracked open, and the river takes that as an invitation to pour in. At first it feels good against my hot skin, cool, cleansing. The sound it makes is music to Mom's words. But suddenly there's only water. I throw my shoulder against the window trying to break the glass. I hold my head up to catch the little bit of air left in the car and gasp for as much as my lungs can hold. "Gordy," I hear. "Ice, hey Ice." The sound belongs to my brother Kevin. My brain wraps around it like a kid around a security blanket. His voice climbs into my head and replaces the crying, the praying, the water. I didn't die. My mouth forms the words easily enough. It's harder to get my mind to accept them. One part of me knows I didn't drown, but another part of my fucked up brain thinks I did, just like the kids in the back, just like Mom meant me to. My brother holds my arms down on the bed, thinking he's keeping me safe now like he couldn't before. My jaw is sore from clenching my teeth to stop myself from repeating the words, but part of me is still in the river, and Kevin knows that. "You're okay," he says. It isn't a question. He doesn't trust me enough to release my arms immediately, but once he does, they automatically fold up around me, stiff and sore like the broken wings of a gull. It hurts worse than after a hockey game where I fended off a ton of shots on goal, worse than it did on that day when it actually happened. My eyes take a minute to focus, but when they do, it's on the bashed-up wall next to my bed. The blue paint is chipped. The edges of the hole in the plaster are tinged with blood stains we've given up trying to wash away or paint over. That's what happens when Kevin isn't around. I try to claw my way out of the car into the surface. The wall, the lamp, my own skin, all of them have been bruised at some point from the dream, which is really a memory. Without either of us saying anything, Kevin pulls the sweat-damp blankets off me and replaces them with fresh dry ones from the closet, just like he's done hundreds of times over the past 5 years. And just like I've done hundreds of times before, I wrap up in them and try, unsuccessfully, to stop shivering. "Sleep," he says. "You have practice tomorrow." Tomorrow. School. Hockey. It seems a million years away, but I nod. We both know it'll be hours before I work up, trusting my brain not to do this all over again. Kevin sits down at my desk and pretends to read. He'll sit there until I fall asleep, however long that takes. I watch him and remind myself that because he's here, I'm safe. You'd never know we're only half-brothers from how close we are or from looking at us. If it weren't for the fact he's 16 months older with the inches to prove it, and that my eyes are green and his are brown, you might think we're twins. But it isn't our eye color or heights that were really the important differences between us. See, Kevin and I had the same mother, but it was the fact that we had different fathers that mattered. Having different fathers meant that Mom planned for Kevin to live and planned for me to die when she drove the car into the river.